Rock culture can choose to embrace this and be stoked on it and find a way to be part of it, or they can choose to sit on the sidelines and watch the world pass them by. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock NBA, and if you think this is going to be another one of these videos where it's all bad news, and I say that rock is doomed, it's all but dead, well, that is not what this video is about. You know how in an action movie where the main character gets locked in a cage and they throw it in the water, and they're struggling in vain to get out of the cage, and then suddenly at the last minute, just when you think that they're about to die, their buddy that you forgot about appears out of nowhere.
Show me! I'm coming down!
And then they escape, kill the bad guy, and take a victory lap? Well, I think that is actually kind of what's going on here. Rock in 2020 is the guy in the cage, and Rap is the buddy who comes along to save him. And if rock bands play their cards right, this actually could be their chance for the mainstream comeback that so many rock fans have been looking for. I will explain exactly what I mean in this video, but first, if you haven't followed me yet on Instagram, I would love it if you would do that. And second, I want to thank Raycon for sponsoring this video. Raycon is a premium wireless audio brand that you've seen on people like Snoop Dogg and my girl Cardi B. They sent me a pair of their everyday E25 wireless earbuds. I just took them for a test drive, and I have to say, honestly, I'm impressed. They sound great, they pair super easily, which is really important to me because it drives me insane messing around with Bluetooth devices that don't connect well. And they start at about half the price of other premium wireless earbuds. They have a noise isolating fit that keeps your audio from going out and background noise from coming in. They come with this nice little wireless charging case, and they last up to 6 hours on a single charge. And if you've never used wireless earbuds, let me tell you, once you do, you're never gonna go back. These things are great for working out, listening to music or podcasts, or doing one of the 9 million Zoom meetings that a lot of us have these days. This is clearly not one of these things where a celebrity just puts their name on some cheap product. These are really well done, and I'm definitely gonna keep using them. And also, my wife is obsessed with Love and Hip Hop, so I hope that I get a couple points in her eyes because the company is founded by Ray J, who you may know from Love and Hip Hop Hollywood. So if you want to get your own Raycons, then go to buyraycon.com/punkrocknba and you'll get 15% off your order. And with that out of the way, let's get into it.
Life should always be this good. And now every moment can be with Mellow Rock.
Now, before I get into the specifics here, the main idea that I'm operating from in this video is that any genre that doesn't have a constant influx of young new fans coming in is on its way out. Because without that, it means you're kind of stuck with the existing fan base that's going to continue to get older and older and older. And the reality is that young people are the ones who decide what's cool and set the tone for culture. And I mean young people as in like high school kids. No matter what music you're into now, high school kids are the ones who gave it a chance when nobody else would, put it on the map, and made it cool. And so with that in mind, what does that mean for the world of rock and metal in 2020? Well, first, I'll give you the bad news.
Uh-oh.
Everything that I've said about rock for the past like 2 years or so is still true, and honestly is probably more true than ever. I know that a lot of people aren't going to want to hear this, but in my personal opinion, rock is just kind of running low on new ideas. I don't really see any popular rock artists pushing the boundaries, and I mean popular in the sense of anywhere close to the mainstream. And in fact, if anything, I would say that rock has gotten less interesting in the past 3 or 4 years. And let me go through a few examples. On the heavier side of things, as I've talked about in some of my other videos, pretty much everybody is doing that like genty, nu metal-y butt rock kind of thing. Everybody wants to sound like some combination of Linkin Park, Limp Bizkit, and Periphery. For example, which isn't inherently a bad thing. It's not my cup of tea, but I know a lot of people like it, and I'm certainly not here to tell anybody what their influences should or shouldn't be. But I do think it's fair to say that none of the bands doing that style have the kind of really exceptional songs that bands like Linkin Park, Limp Bizkit, Slipknot, or Korn had, and helped them become such big breakthrough artists. And I also don't see anyone in those bands with the kind of star power that people like Fred Durst or Jonathan Davis or Corey Taylor had. I don't really see any of these bands having any kind of breakthrough success or becoming anywhere close to mainstream. Now, to be fair, there are some newer rock bands that are doing well commercially. For example, my friends Bad Wolves, they're crushing it, very stoked for them. Greta Van Fleet and I Prevail are a couple other examples of bands doing great business, or at least as good as can be expected in 2020. And I'm genuinely happy for their success. I respect the shit out of them because it's very, very hard to make a living as a band. So I want to give them full credit for that, but if these are like the newest breakthrough bands in rock, that really highlights what I think is the biggest problem facing the genre, which is that there's no artists who are like an entry point for new fans.
Stepping on the highway, girl.
Like I said, I have nothing but respect for those bands, but they're not for kids, right? I mean, 14-year-olds are not getting into Bad Wolves or Greta Van Fleet. These are bands that make music for adults. And there's nothing at all wrong with that, but you can see why this is kind of a problem for the genre. With no new fans coming in, that means the existing fan base just gets older and older and older, which just compounds the whole thing because, let's be real, what 14-year-old wants to listen to music for 30-year-olds?
You know, by the time I'm 30, I should just give up. Like, what's the point of going on at that age?
Okay, so all that might be true on like the heavier rock side of things. But what about pop punk? That's always been an entry point into rock for younger fans. Like, how many kids started out by getting into Blink, New Found Glory, Good Charlotte, Simple Plan, or whatever before then graduating into hardcore and metalcore and whatever else? Well, I actually think it's kind of the same story here. Pop punk has become a weirdly kind of adult genre. I think the biggest trend in pop punk these days has been a move away from the like really polished, slick, poppy sound that those 2000s and 90s bands had, towards something that's a lot more influenced by like indie rock and math rock and Midwest emo. A couple good examples of that would be Pup and Hot Mulligan. And I do see a few younger kids getting into this stuff. Like, we live across from the street from a skate park, and I'll see the kind of hipster skater kids, the ones with their high water cutoff pants, listening to this kind of stuff. But it's a pretty niche thing. Like, these bands are never going to be the kind of big mainstream artists or an entry point into the genre the same way that like Blink or Good Charlotte was. There are still a handful of bands doing something closer to that 90s or 2000s style of pop punk. For example, like Knuckle Puck, Real Friends, Neck Deep is probably the biggest and most relevant of them. Their last album hit the top 10 in both the US and the UK. They have a new one coming out soon that I think is going to be pretty big. And there probably are some younger kids getting into the scene through these bands, but I think for the most part, the audience for this stuff is the same people who listened to it in 2012, only instead of being 17, now they're 25. Okay, so maybe it's not pop punk, but what about indie rock? A few people have mentioned to me in the comments, I think rightly so, that I oftentimes overlook indie rock, and I think that's a fair point. This is not my scene at all. As I've said a million times, I absolutely hate indie rock, and I don't know that much about it. So it is kind of a blind spot for me that I probably do overlook. And there are some artists here that are doing really well. For example, Tame Impala has like 12 million monthly listeners on Spotify and 3 platinum albums. And these are fairly mainstream artists. So in that sense, you could say that there's some rock bands that are doing well in the mainstream. But just like with Greta Van Fleet or Bad Wolves, this is not really music for kids. Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure most 14-year-olds aren't like, oh fuck yes, a new Peach Pit song is out. I can't wait to make a TikTok about this. There's something dark hanging over my... So overall, the way I see it is that in 2020, yes, rock still has some commercial success, but it's almost all around bands with an older audience. And that should make you a little bit nervous if you care about the future of the genre. But here's the good news. Rock is back. Just not in the rock scene per se. So here's where things get interesting, because a couple years ago I would have said rock is dead as shit. There's not a single mainstream song with a guitar in it anywhere. Put a fork in it, it's done. But that's not true anymore. There's actually a ton of guitars in mainstream music now. But the twist is that it's coming from artists who we would think of as rappers, not rock bands. The clearest example of that to me is Machine Gun Kelly, who you may remember started out doing rap like this. But now he's doing this. Which, aside from his voice being like a little bit deeper than the classic pop punk kind of sound, this could easily have been a Blink song from 1999. And speaking of Blink, he also did this song with Travis Barker and Yungblud last year. Watch me take a good thing and fuck it all up in one night. That gives me strong 2005 Hot Topic vibes, especially Youngblood's part, which if you told me was a part from a Used song, I would probably believe you. Smoke me love, we can fly into the night. And speaking of Yungblud, he really is like straight out of 2005 in a lot of ways. And just like the mall screamo artists back then, like Taking Back Sunday, My Chemical Romance, and the Used that were hitting the Billboard Top 10, he's big. He's got gold and platinum singles, he's got 6 million monthly listeners on Spotify, he dated Halsey, he's done songs with Marshmello on Blackbear, and look at him, like he could easily have been on the cover of Alternative Press in 2006, right? As emo as it gets. And his fan base seems to match. Like if you look at them, they're the same kind of suburban emo kids that would have been into My Chemical Romance or Seosin 15 years ago. And one important thing to note here is that he has a lot of female fans. And I mean that not in some like politically correct kind of way. I mean that just from the sense of like a healthy scene needs some diversity. You need more than just a sea of 29-year-old dudes with beards out there. Another person who I'd put on this list is Blackbear.
I'm not alone, it's just me and your goal.
I don't know a ton about him, but I know he comes from like the scene world. He used to be in a pop punk band. He did a song with Tyler Carter back in like the Woe Is Me days. And he's friends with Lil Aaron. He's a bit more on the pop side than someone like Yungblud, but there's definitely like a 2005 mall emo kind of undercurrent to his stuff.
In this crippling depression, I thought I learned my lesson.
And again, he has a ton of young fans, the same kind of people that would have been into Pete Wentz probably 15 years ago. And just like Pete Wentz, you'll see him in the headlines of teen gossip sites now and then. Oh my God, is he dating Bella Thorne? And obviously, I don't personally care about that. Like, I'm not reading Teen Vogue in my free time. But I actually think that's important because if you want to be mainstream like rock was at its peak, you want people who are part of the larger pop culture conversation, just like Pete Wentz and Travis Barker were back in the 2000s. Post Malone is another big one. His music doesn't really sound overtly like rock, but I think by now everybody is aware of his history as a rock guy. He did a song with Ozzy. And just today, one of the biggest rappers of the past 5 years or so, Juice WRLD, rest in peace, put out a straight up pop punk song.
JK Juice WRLD, you're so awesome. I'm running up funds.
And I could go on and on. There's other examples of this like Ian Dior, but I think you get the idea. The point here is that for anybody who's ready to throw up their hands in despair that guitar music is dead, it's not. In fact, I would say that guitar music is more relevant than it has been in a long time. This is not a niche thing. Like, these are big mainstream artists that have guitars and acoustic drums and rock vocals in their songs. It's just that they aren't really perceived as rock artists. So they've got the guitars, and also, very importantly, they're bringing in that young fan base that I talked about. That's so critical for long-term survival. And on the underground side of things, the whole rock revival thing is even more true. You've heard me talk a million times about emo rappers. You might be sick of it, but I'm gonna do it again. Because what's interesting to me is how over the last few years, a lot of them kind of come full circle and gone back to playing rock again. Like, okay, I did the rap thing for a few years and that was cool, but you know what? I kind of just want to go back to like playing pop punk and emo songs again. And this isn't a totally new thing. People like Wicked Face, Brings Eternal, Cold Hart, and Gabe have been doing this for a few years. But I have seen it get a lot more traction in the past year or so. For example, Lil Aaron's new stuff sounds straight up like Kid Rock songs from 2001.
I'm the man, I'm the fucking man. Type of money I don't think that you could understand.
Another example is Narc. He was one of the earlier emo rappers, but he has since moved on to doing something that honestly wouldn't sound out of place to me in the early 90s next to a band like Mudhoney. Note the Minor Threat sample and the Germs shirt. Horsehead is another example of this, another one of these guys that came out of the emo rap scene, but what he's doing now actually sounds pretty similar to like Pup or Hot Mulligan. Again, it's kind of come full circle.
Hard on the floor, constant struggle of who seems to want it more.
Another one of my favorite people doing this is DC the Don.
Like she holy, bumping OFOs, stacking too much green, my pocket stuff with guacamole.
But I would say the ultimate example of this is a new band called If I Die First, which is basically like a 2005 mall screamo revival band made up of a bunch of guys from the emo rap scene, like Lil Lotus and Zubin. Straight up like Seosin from First to Last, The Used, Worship. I think it's great. A lot of other people seem to like it, so I expect to see a lot more of this happen in the near future, like emo rappers going back to playing just straight up emo and pop punk again. So the way I see it is this. Rap has totally embraced rock over the past couple years, and in some ways has kind of eaten rock's lunch. Because, like I said, guitar music is actually back in the mainstream, but they did it without any actual rock bands being involved.
You know something? I'm cool with this.
So to bring it all home, I think the ball is in rock's court. Rock culture can choose to embrace this and be stoked on it and find a way to be part of it, or they can choose to sit on the sidelines and watch the world pass them by. And to be fair, I wouldn't say that rock is like overtly rejecting any of this stuff the way that they rejected the scene bands of the 2000s. I think it's more like most rock fans are kind of unaware that this stuff is even happening. With that said, I want to give credit where it's due to the rock artists that have embraced it. Prevail did a song with Joyner Lucas.
Keep on serving, I wonder if it's all worth it, I wonder. All I need.
Sid from Slipknot did a song with Lucifena. All Time Low have a Blackbear collab.
I made my bed and I'm still wondering. Why.
And Travis Barker in particular has been very, very active. He's worked with probably half the people I talked about in this video. And that's important because his cosign obviously means a lot, and having him involved with any of this stuff gives it a level of instant rock credibility. So I think it's very cool that he's been so involved. And aside from doing the obvious and working with up-and-coming artists, I think there's a few things that rock needs to just fundamentally change about the way it operates if it wants to be relevant in the future. First of all, understand that solo artists, not bands, are the model going forward. Notice that almost every single example I talked about here is a solo artist, and there's a reason for that. For one, it's just easier for people to connect with an individual than a band. This is actually the same reason that corporate social media accounts get terrible engagement, because think about it, we want to connect with other people, not companies or brands, and that's really what a band is. And let's be honest, in most bands, at least half the members are dead weight anyway, so you're not losing much. I mean, look at maybe the two biggest breakout successes of rock in the past 5 or 10 years, Following Reverse and Panic at the Disco. Both of those started as bands and have now essentially turned into solo artists over time. I think solo artists are also better from like a creative perspective. As anyone who's been part of like a creative team of any kind can tell you, making creative decisions by committee is the worst. And with solo artists, you get one person's individual creative vision, not watered down with any compromises because the bassist didn't like the chorus or whatever. And it also makes way more sense financially. It's pretty simple, like 4 or 5 people in a band means you're splitting the money a lot more ways. So I think the model going forward is people like Bill Murray, who I've talked about before, Johnny Frank from Attack Attack. He makes a comfortable living off of like 200,000 monthly Spotify listeners. So do Fatsy and Shinigami. And the common thread here is that they are all DIY solo artists. They record and produce themselves, they do all their social media themselves, there's no label. That is the template for the future. And I know that may seem like a bitter pill to swallow because for some reason, like, rock people have this emotional attachment to the idea of a band, but I would say it's actually just going back to the roots. I mean, if you think about it, Buddy Holly, Jimi Hendrix, Little Richard, Chuck Berry. So I don't look at this as like throwing away an important part of rock culture. I think it's just like going back to the roots.
Away from me, and I'll stay away from you.
Rock also needs to get out of this pattern of like the 2-year album cycle. That might have been fine 10 or 20 years ago, but it just does not work with the world we live in today. I mean, going 2 years without releasing new material is insane. Think about how short everybody's attention span is. We can barely remember what happened 2 days ago, let alone 2 years ago, right? So you've got to be constantly putting out new stuff or you're going to just get forgotten. Again, look at Ronnie Radke. Falling in Reverse has moved to this model, and look how well it's working for him. Why do you need an album? You just need one good single. I would way rather release 10 singles than one album, because each one of those singles is an opportunity for you to hit a home run, rather than betting the whole farm on that one album. And lastly, for the love of God, bands, please get better at social media. It blows my mind how bad bands are at the internet. You guys absolutely suck at this compared to rappers. Like, look at the majority of band accounts and you see 2 things. 1, a bunch of ads for their merch with terrible engagement because guess what? Nobody wants to see your ads. And number 2, the same old boring interchangeable live photo with some lame caption like, "Thanks Pittsburgh, see you next time." That's just not gonna cut it. You need to look at yourself as a content creator just as much as you're a musician. Rappers understand this. They know that their job is essentially to be an influencer who also makes music, and rock artists need to get on board with that too. I understand you may not like that. I know that all you want to do is just sit in your room and play guitar and hope that somehow by putting out these songs, like magically, people are going to find them and love your music. But that's just not how the world works in 2020. It's about your content as much as it is your music.
That's just the way it is.
So if rock can do all these things and ride the wave of this guitar music revival that's happening, well, then I see potential. Maybe this is rock's chance to get back in the mainstream. But if they don't, if they choose to sit this one out, if they refuse to change the way they operate to be relevant for the way that we consume entertainment in 2020, well, then I don't know what to tell you. That's your choice, but don't come crying to me when your genre dies of old age.
Yeah. Take me, sweet death. I await your loving embrace.
All right, my friends, that does it for this video about the state of rock in 2020. As always, I would love to know what you think in the comments. Let me know what you think about this guitar revival that's happening in both the mainstream and the underground. And also, I want to thank my good friend Michael Montoya from Winds of Plague, aka Morgoth Beats, who's produced for a ton of these artists like Lil Xan and Scarlord and Bones, Zillakami, who helped me put this together. Number 2, if you haven't followed me yet on Instagram, I would love it if you would. There's a link to that in the description. And number 3, as always, I want to thank everyone who supports us on Patreon, especially those who support at the True Cult level or above. It is because of your support that we're able to do the podcast and a lot of other things. Patrons get access to every podcast a week early. There's an opportunity to have me review your band or your podcast, your YouTube channel, your design portfolio, any other thing that you would like to get my feedback on. There's also a private Discord server that I'm in all the time. So if that sounds interesting to you, then check it out at the link in the description. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.